Hello and welcome to this interview from Bystanders No More. Today we are joined by Chris Gunness, former spokesperson for UNRWA and now director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. In this conversation, we will explore why Gaza matters for all of us, why accountability is essential, and why UNRWA has become such a target alongside the humanitarian crisis, the dismantling of aid, and the responsibilities of ordinary citizens everywhere. Hello, Chris.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, why is Israel so focused on dismantling UNRWA? What does UNRWA represent that makes it a target? And what would the world lose if UNRWA were defunded or dismantled?
That's because UNRWA stands up for the rights of Palestinian refugees. There are 6 million registered refugees of UNRWA. The number is rising every day. And Israel believes that if they have the right of return and they go back to Israel, that will destroy the Jewish nature of the state. That will be a huge security threat. There are all sorts of reasons why Israel imagines, and I use the word imagine, that if UNRWA wasn't destroyed and the right of return were implemented, Israel would effectively be destroyed as a Jewish state. Now, of course, that is complete nonsense.
What happens to children, mothers, hospitals, schools, and long-term refugee services if UNRWA is defunded or dismantled during this genocide or even after?
In the health sector, UNRWA has just over 20 primary health clinics across the Gaza Strip. So UNRWA doesn't run hospitals, but of course it takes the burden off hospitals because there's an awful lot of primary healthcare that UNRWA does in Gaza that the hospitals, before they were destroyed, incidentally, were doing. But UNRWA doesn't just do primary health clinics. They also deliver food to over 1 million people before the war. And then very finally, the biggest program of UNRWA is education, is schools. UNRWA runs schools for about 250,000 children in Gaza, at least it did before the war. And it had a network of several hundred schools. And then the very final asset that UNRWA has, which is perhaps the most important, is its staff. UNRWA had 12,000 staff before this war. Now, over 300 of them have been killed.
Israel and US-backed alternatives, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, are presented as substitutes. Why are they not a replacement in mandate, logistics, neutrality, data systems, or reach?
Well, I now call the GHF genocide, hunger, and famine because that's precisely what it is inflicting on the people of the Gaza Strip. The GHF has 4 distribution points, 3 in the deep south, 1 in the north. UNRWA has 400 across the Gaza Strip. UNRWA has a vast network of warehouses, food distribution points, thousands of staff to distribute the food. It has refugee lists with hundreds of thousands of registered refugees who have all been vetted, so we know that they're not Hamas. And when the refugees come to collect the food, they sign for it. It goes directly to them, so there is no way that Hamas can steal that aid. The GHF has no such system. Other differences include the fact that UNRWA has been delivering food in Palestine since 1950. The GHF has been going for a couple of months. So UNRWA has a long history, a lot of trust within the communities. The staff that the GHF employs, effectively, they're a bunch of cowboys. They're a bunch of ex-Marines. UNRWA has humanitarian workers. Many of them have decades and decades of humanitarian experience. UNRWA is transparent and fully accountable to its donors. We have no idea where the GHF is getting its money. We have no idea who supports it. And perhaps last of all, the GHF is fully supported by the Israeli army, the IGF, as I call it, the Israel Genocide Force, who are inflicting a genocide on the people of Gaza. In my view, the GHF needs to be disbanded immediately, and UNRWA needs to be allowed back in to be, as Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, put it, the backbone of the world's response.
I want to ask you now, as you are talking about action, what can a concerned person do now? How can they make a difference?
They can demand that full government funding is restored to UNRWA, number one. I think that those listening to this can also hold their governments to account in terms of the system that we already have. So, for example, the International Court of Justice, in a ruling in last July, made it clear that the occupation is illegal because it violates the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. And the occupation must end immediately. And the General Assembly has also backed that. The General Assembly has demanded that the occupation should end. So we can also, as individuals, make sure that our government does everything it can in terms of trade embargo, arms embargo, a diplomatic embargo, academic embargo, a cultural embargo. There must be a full embargo of Israel. And we can all, as individuals, make sure that our governments do those things. The other thing that people can do, they can show solidarity. There is a growing global solidarity movement. And I think, when you're in Gaza, it feels like a very, very lonely place. And right now, even more so, because the world is standing by and watching your children, your grandchildren, your brothers, your sisters, your parents being slaughtered every day. And I think acts of solidarity, millions and millions of people taking to the streets and screaming support and showing solidarity with the people of Gaza. And let's not forget the West Bank too, where the final stage of Israel's state-sponsored erasure of Palestine is going completely unchecked. So the people of Gaza and the West Bank, including occupied East Jerusalem, need to be sent a message that the people of the world stand in solidarity with them.
Could you please tell me why should someone who's living in Europe or in the US care about what is happening in Gaza and Palestine?
Because it's Gaza and Palestine today, and it will be it'll be them tomorrow. Look at what's happening in the UK. The British government is using legislation which ought to be used against Al Qaeda and ISIS terrorist organizations to arrest grandparents and pensioners, peacefully demonstrating against state-sponsored terrorism, which the government in this country itself is giving full support to. Now, do we want to live in a society which allows these appalling distortions of the law? What we're seeing is the rise of the authoritarian right. The other really important point I think to make is a point which Nelson Mandela always used to make, and that is that we, the people of the world, will not be free until all people are free. People of conscience must understand that they can never be free. Their children can never be free. There will always be the threat of violence against them, against their communities, unless this running sore of the Middle East is sorted out. There is no such thing as an isolation of what you describe as the middle ground from the crisis in Gaza. It just doesn't work like that. Sooner or later, it will come back to haunt all of us.
We see today how Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, is being attacked not only by the Israeli government, but also by the US government and other powerful actors. What are the long-term consequences of these attacks on officials like Albanese, but also how you are telling people to speak and to act in solidarity with Palestine when it's jeopardized their being, their working situation, their living situation?
The attack on her is absolutely disgraceful. And it's illegal, by the way. I mean, she is covered by the UN Privileges and Immunities Convention, under which people who work for the United Nations are given immunity precisely from these kind of sanctions. I think what I would say in the wider question, you asked me, what about other people who are seeing the lobby and their supporters? In this country, in the UK, there's a very interesting case where a group called the UK Lawyers for Israel have started to use what are called vexatious reasons for hunting down groups who are doing things like putting on concerts to raise money for Palestine. And people have to understand that standing up against genocide, that standing on the right side of history, that speaking up for the oppressed in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is not a crime. I would say it's a duty. It's something we all have to do. And sooner or later, governments will realize how stupid this is. I mean, the Starmer administration in this country is a laughing stock. I mean, we have our prisons full to overflowing, and yet they are literally arresting pensioners, peacefully demonstrating against genocide, against the killing and starvation of children. And if you define state-sponsored terrorism as the use of violence by a state to achieve a political end, then what else would you define Netanyahu's use of genocide in order to overthrow Hamas? That is surely the definition of state-sponsored terrorism. And the fact is that people in this country are protesting against it, and the Starmer administration is arresting them. It's making a fool of itself.
Chris, I will close with you with a final question. Is there anything you feel isn't being said enough about Gaza, Palestine, UNRWA, accountability, or the humanitarian struggle more broadly? What do you wish more people would ask or think more deeply about?
There is a sense of history that I think is forgotten. And when I look at pictures of children scratching around in the dirt in Gaza for grains of rice and food, I think of the children in the Warsaw Ghetto inflicted on the district of Warsaw by the Nazis. I think of the work that I did. I was the UN spokesman in the former Yugoslavia in 1995 when the Srebrenica genocide, the massacre took place against the Bosnian Serbs. And the other thing that's going on is that Netanyahu and the Israelis are weaponizing the Holocaust, the memory of the Holocaust. And we have Danny Danon, the UN ambassador of Israel, putting on a yellow star, which was, Jews were forced to use in the Holocaust. Friends of mine who are Holocaust survivors, who are watching the Holocaust being weaponized by these cheap, here today, gone tomorrow politicians, is utterly appalling. And I think it ultimately, by having this sense of history, we lay bare the moral depravity of what is actually going on. This idea that by criticizing Israel, that being critical of Zionism, I know so many Jewish people and Israelis who reject Zionism for what it is, a 19th century nationalist movement that's been weaponized to the point of genocide today. There is nothing wrong with buying into that analysis. There's nothing wrong with seeing Zionism and what is being done in Israel today in the name of Zionists, the complete erasure of Palestine with bombs in Gaza, with starvation in Gaza, and with this vicious ethnic cleansing, sadistic attacks by Jewish settlers who moved into the ancestral homes of the Palestinians in the last few months or weeks or years, fully backed by the Israeli army. There is nothing anti-Semitic about criticizing that.
Thank you so much for this important conversation. For those watching, if you care about what you have heard, please remember, you can engage, you can act, and your actions make a difference. At Bystanders No More, we provide tools, resources, and ways to get involved, whether through political action, professional skills, or direct support. Together, we can ensure that no one remains a bystander. Thank you.